Hey guys, welcome to the 7th installment of our discussion of Simone de Beauvoir's The Ethics of Ambiguity. I am Luke Johnson, and today we are joined by...
Oh, it's me, Jordan Klein.
And we're doing the roundtable thing, so we're going to start having CJ Eller sit in.
That's me.
Yeah. So many of you recognize CJ from the other classes that we've been building on the Noetic platform. Something I want to do before we got started today, I want to give a shout out to our friend who has a paddleboard company here in Northern Virginia. It's called Paddle Nova. And the website is paddlenova.com. They got yoga and bar classes on it. You should go check it out. It's very cool. All right. So we're going to be covering pages 78 through 105, I believe, on Simone de Beauvoir. And let's just jump right into it. I don't know. You guys have likely revisited the last podcast. I thought we did a really good job. I didn't really have any significant problems with anything that we did there. But now would be sort of a time to say something about that if you did have a problem with it.
No, I don't think so.
Yeah.
I think one thing I was interested in, I know we were talking about how artists sort of deny the ambiguous, or at least you guys were talking about, and Simone was talking about how an artist sort of denies the ambiguous condition in the sense that they think like, oh, we're creators, so we're almost godlike figures, and we just birth these great, pieces of art and everything. And I was curious, and maybe we'll go into it further along, but I'm wondering what she thinks about artists who admit to the ambiguous condition and who realize that, okay, it's more complicated than that we're not gods, that we're in this really complicated network of creation, and that we're not just gods, but we're just human beings that are wrapped up in this sort of ambiguous strain of influences and resources and historical narrative, all these different things.
Yeah, well, we're going to talk about that, and I think generally what her response would be is you can still be an artist and live in the ambiguous condition of existentialism. Mm-hmm. And I think, I can speak to like the art that you and I make. I think that we do. I think that I love what you do at Shenandoah with the gallery music. I definitely think you're sort of the artist in the right way for Simone de Beauvoir. And the right way for Simone de Beauvoir is that the artistic opportunity is not so much that you are sort of creating this frozen galaxy of art and you are this god hovering over it, and you are to be treated by the Republic and received as a godlike being. Mm-hmm. But that your artistic enterprise opens up the possibility of liberation and self-disclosure to others. Mm. So, like, when the musical performances that you put on, I personally have felt my own vitality and intelligence disclosed in a unique way because of the attitudinal approach to artistic endeavor that you, CJ Eller, possess in your approach to music.
So
I think Simone would approve of how you do art. I think she'd find problematic individuals who are doing it for the sake of being remembered for all time, for being celebrities, I think she would be very okay with individuals like you and I have talked in passing about people like Picasso. How Picasso constantly once he sort of mastered an art form, he moved on to something else that he felt uncomfortable in and sort of evolved in public, and then he moved on from that. He was always making himself uncomfortable, exposing new worlds within himself and to others. So that kind of artist should probably...
I think you definitely bring in something that I know you two are going to talk about today, which is respecting other people's freedom in that sense, and that will be enlightening, I think, to this question. So,
and early in the passage that we're going to talk about today, she does talk about how, and it applies to philosophy too, right? Is like we're not striving for like absolute knowledge with a capital K. We're not, for art, we're not going to distill absolute beauty and like just make a beeline for it and just obsess over that, because she really says it's like the process, it's not the end, and we're not looking for absolutes because we're never going to be satisfied doing that, and we're just going to drive ourselves like insane.
I would say that a lot of the stuff that we covered today was probably this sort of thing.
Cover today.
Yeah, what did I say?
That we covered today.
Will cover today. I'm sorry, my grandma's not to speak. Something that we'll cover today. I will say that probably this section was probably the most influential on me, and probably brought both you guys into my life. When CJ. I think the very first real conversation I had with CJ, I was like, yeah, man, I've been reading this book by Simone de Beauvoir. She's changing my perspective on everything. We should get you involved.
Yeah.
And then I think, Jordan, you got involved shortly after that. So
let's get into it then.
Yeah, let's get into it. Okay, so at the outset of what we're going to cover today, Simone is she's sensitive to the claims that individuals are saying, look, the ethics of ambiguity is still too vague and vacuous for us to get our minds around. And there's going to be there's probably going to be an element of elusiveness to what Simone and any existentialist is going to talk about. Because the thing that we have to understand here is that the difficulty in systematizing an existential system. We're talking about trying to take the subjective point of view of the individual and translate it into something that resembles a science. There is value in this because it sort of clarifies it to a certain degree, but ultimately the ultimate test for it is not going to be so much us talking it out, but trying it on in our own lives. And I think that's something that Kierkegaard helps us understand a great deal. But maybe to understand what the ethics of ambiguity really is, we have to look at what it's not, right? And we've talked about one of the things that it's not, we've already talked about so far, which is setting up, like Jordan said, this concept of art as being in pursuance of the ultimate form of the beautiful. No, right? It's process over perfection. But if we go into art thinking that we are going to be masters in the most beautiful things, then we're going to fail existentially. And she enumerates two other things that we commonly look for as sort of answers to the ambiguous condition. Jordan, do you know what those other two are that she mentions at the beginning of this outset?
I mean, like, everything, but I mean, are we sort of talking about, like
science,
what we touched on, like, earlier,
technology.
Science, so science and, like, technology. And I thought it was really
What's your problem
great.
with science?
Well, the problem is that with science, and I kind of thought about this in the early, 20th century with eugenics, and, like, this idea that if you take science to a certain extreme, then it can become, like, the serious.
Yeah. I mean,
that's what I thought about. So I kind of contrasted, the scientific revolution with eugenics, because the scientific revolution was mostly about, like, ideas and, like, figuring out measurements and, like, the way that our universe works, versus we're gonna use this certain science for our own ends.
But I don't think she's going to say that people in the scientific revolution weren't immune to becoming the serious man. Just to reiterate stuff from past podcasts, the serious man is someone totally beholden to unconditional value, right? And the scientist believes that truth is out there, and one day they're going to understand it all. Do we see that perspective in our culture today? Like, right, we have this thing where we pit science versus reasoning. You can pick up a Time magazine, it's like when they're like, don't have anything else to write about, they'll put like, science versus faith, who will win, right? She's going to say that faith and science
they both lose.
They both suck, right? Simone's view, and for different faith posits that there's this sky daddy that's going to take care of everything, and that our lives don't really have that much significance. He'll just wrap it all up in the apocalypse. But science is going to say that truth is out there. You can know it. You can be further or closer away from it.
Yeah, and the problem with science is that you can become sort of a slave to factity. You can just reduce everything to fact, and that kind of loses a lot of the content or meaning.
Right. Well,
if I can just basically just say, oh, well, I'm just the makeup of atoms, I don't really mean anything, then that's kind of lame.
Right, but
a little depressing.
And I think she's getting a lot of this from Kierkegaard as well. Yeah. Kierkegaard's going to say is that, look, first of all, science is a lie, or in a way, right? Because it's ultimately going to all be based on approximation. There is no end of science, because there's going to be something, like we with the finite human mind, we can't possibly sort of encapsulate all of it. So we're just going to constantly just be open. The right way to do science is not to think that we are marching towards truth, but we're just opening up new areas of discovery.
Right.
And so look at the fringes of science, right? At the fringes of science, are we really doing science anymore? Like when we test for the law of gravitation, like we throw a bowling ball up in the air and we see it come down at a certain rate or something like that. That's one type of science. But when we look at say quantum theory, what do they do? What's going on at the edges of science? Is it science anymore? What's going on there? It's like art almost. Like they're just kind of well, maybe this is true, or maybe this integrates with that, or it's philosophical, artistic. It's much more process oriented.
It's crazy.
And I think that's those of us who are interested in theoretical science need to understand the ambiguity at the edges, and need to have that humble us when we go around thinking that we have ultimate knowledge of the universe, and that we may have it one day.
And maybe that what we do is really based on ambiguity, even though we think it's actually based on, I'm marching towards a goal and I know what I'm doing, or I'm a successful businessman, I'm a successful artist, I'm a successful this, a successful that, realizing that, like you said, maybe there is a kind of ambiguous condition too, where it's just like, okay, maybe skill was part of it, but maybe it was just chance that you got this $1 million deal. I don't know. Just, I guess maybe some way to make us humble, or just realize that, sometimes it's not all in our hands.
It could all melt away at any moment.
Right.
Right, and I think that's really...
Which would drift one to religion if you think about that in some way. If it's all just going to disappear, then maybe I should believe
Well, that's what Kierkegaard is going to say. Yeah. Kierkegaard is going to say, well, look, nothing is permanent in the world. So if there's nothing permanent in the world, where does permanence come from? And permanence is going to come from within the individual in a commitment, right? Mm-hmm. And that's going to be how that we sort of... that's going to be Kierkegaard's vibe. But we'll save that for Kierkegaard. And she talks about, she disparages, in the same sort of breath with science, she disparages the obsession with technology. Technology's obsession is to make things more efficient, right? It sets up this unconditional value as well. So in art, it's beautiful. In science, it's truth. In technology, it's efficiency. But, we have good reason to call into question efficiency, right? As an unconditional value. Is efficiency always a good? Think about it. Our lives are more efficient than ever, right? You can have anything on your iPhone right now, right? But are our lives better for having that efficiency? If that's the case, why do we live in one of the most developed countries in the world that is also one of the most miserable if you pay attention to any sort of psychological qualitative indexes?
Yeah, even if you think about it in terms of basic survival, right? With the Industrial Revolution. Oh my God, I'm so sorry.
It's okay. Things happen. It's life.
Yeah. If you really think about the Industrial Revolution, right, and how now we have other problems obesity and type 2 diabetes and stuff like that, and these are a lot of problems that were completely unprecedented, right, before in human history. So technology does breed its own problems, but there's this one really interesting quotation that I want to read that she attributes to us being obsessed with freeing up more time.
Sure.
She says it's contradictory to want to save up existence.
Yeah. So why did that passage jump out to you? Why did you find that significant?
I think it's...
I could theorize, but I want to hear what you liked it.
To me, it just stood out because it's the idea that it's not just we're obsessed with time, and then for me, the way it resonated with me was this idea that, we're expected to basically work all of our lives until retirement and then have this idea of the golden years. You spend 15 to 20 years, if you're lucky, just resting on your laurels, which is kind of interesting because it seems to me that Simone would suggest, well, live every day as you want and don't worry about sort of saving up this sort of perfect or halcyon time for existence.
Well, the saving up for time sounds like something in capitalism, which I guess we'll go into later, which is her little critique. But
I think we might get there a little bit sooner than expected. So look, with all these different endeavors, we've talked about how unconditional value ultimately it doesn't allow us to live sort of the proper disposition in regards to the ethics of ambiguity. Something I think is kind of interesting though, right? If we don't have this sort of process approach to science, art, technology, or whatever, it creates sort of an immoral narcissism where we're just sort of focused on our own personal, passionate pursuit of the ideal, right? Mm-hmm. And societally, what's the implication of that? And you've sort of spoken about it somewhat. So let's just say the three of us are just almost erotically just sort of preoccupied with ideas and convey and just getting up here and talking about them or whatnot. If we don't try to bring other people into the sphere and open them up to their own possibilities of self-disclosure, and we don't try to create this ripple effect of other people embracing and staring down the ethical ambiguity, we kind of create a society that's bifurcated between those that are disclosing partially and those who do not disclose at all. Those who just anesthetize themselves with game shows and reality TV.
Right, but that's not really freedom in the true sense, because she makes our freedom conditional on the freedom of others.
Yeah,
so,
we're going to talk.
So in a way, so if other people aren't entirely free to pursue their own ethical projects, then like we aren't free in the full sense.
Right. We're going to have existential reasons for bringing as many people into the fold as possible. But what is the negative besides the fact that we limit ourselves, which is very true, right? Like if I had just been like, if I hadn't read this book and I was like so narcissistic, I'd be like, no, I'm gonna build this Noetic platform. It's gonna be the Luke show. Nobody else can get involved. I'm gonna be Mr. Smart Guy. No other people allowed, just Luke's. All right. If I had done that, and if we had embraced that perspective in general, like where we close it up here to the three of us, and we keep closing it up, she says there's going to be sort of this bifurcation between people who sort of partially disclose in some way, and then those who remain sort of kind of suppressed in their Philistine mechanistic sort of existence, right? And what happens if people aren't given the opportunity to disclose in new ways?
Revolution.
Exactly.
Woo!
Revolt. She thinks that is those are the prime conditions for violent revolt, right? And it seems like to me that Simone might be sympathetic to the idea of revolt, if that allows us for sort of a change of societal conditions where people can engage in that sort of self-disclosure. I'm sort of we'll talk about that when we get to it, but I'm sort of uncomfortable with an existentialist advocating violence on some level. But maybe she thinks it rises to the threshold of action. So what can we say about the ethics of ambiguity so far? I mean, we know if we focus on process over perfection, it's going to diminish our disappointment from not achieving meaningless goals, right? We engage in science, art, technology, philosophy, whatever. It's not about getting an academic post. It's not about winning a Grammy, none of this. Like every single moment is of the utmost importance. We are making our mark upon the world, and that is intensely meaningful at that very moment. Our full vitality and intelligence is disclosed in that moment. And it also is going to involve prioritizing and integrating the freedom of others into it for ourselves, creating that positive feedback loop of freedom.
It's not that we're in class and raising my hand, but isn't trying to strive for the freedom of other individuals and of realizing the ambiguous condition, isn't that a sort of goal as well?
Yeah, I bring that up at the end. Because it seems like she may have contradicted herself by positing a meta unconditional value. I want to. Can I get to that in a little bit?
Yeah, no, I'm just curious about the fact that, and maybe another question I had was whether she approves of people that have goals that they know are unattainable, and yet they just use it kind of as a anchor or sort of as a way, just saying like, if you're an artist, I can't achieve perfection, but I can strive for excellence in some way or another. I can strive for verite, or whatever the hell Greek word you want to use, that I can strive for some kind of good. Even though I can't attain that ultimate good, I can still get that good.
You think she's against that?
I don't know. Maybe
Did you read her that way? Or do you
I'm hearing it right now, so I guess I'm hearing it right now for the first time, but I suppose I think that maybe she's just denying the fact of having those goals in the first place, that she's like take away the verb, just like get rid of that noun of goal.
Yeah, definitely want to get rid of goal, but I don't know if you
ideal.
want to get away from excellence. What do you think, Jordan?
No, I don't think so either. That's why.
Because excellence seems, the way that I understand excellence would be when we're just fully engaged in our work. Like I feel like we're being excellent right now.
So it's like a process thing.
Yeah. I feel like we are obtaining excellence at this very moment. Now, does that mean that we are the best podcast on the planet? No.
Whatever that means.
But do we care? We don't care. We just care about personal excellence and just trying to transcend our, I guess, sort of the dark passivity of not existing at all. That's how I understand excellence. She doesn't really talk about it, but to me, I don't think excellence and the existential viewpoint are incompatible. What do you think, Jordan?
Yeah, I don't know. It kind of reminds me of the Aristotelian idea that you are defined by your own activity.
Yeah.
So, in my mind, excellence and process go hand in hand.
Yeah.
I mean, you can't be excellent at something if you don't practice it.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So does maybe having a goal or some kind of ideal take away from the idea of process, because maybe it's not so much about process, but it is just kind of a step-by-step sort of
thing. It's action. That seems like the biggest thing, the key ingredient. But I think that, it's hard to direct your action if you don't have an objective or an end goal.
So, for instance, like the goal that I have right here is like, is really just to do my best. Is to really just try to communicate the material the best that I can. But, I mean, I'm not pursuing some Educator of the Year award. I'm not pursuing some Kennedy Center honor. I'm not pursuing anything else but just doing my best. But does that particular goal problematize the situation? I don't think it necessarily does.
Yeah, I don't see how it would.
No, because I don't really consciously think about it. It's sort of internally satisfying.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't think that ideal is necessarily problematic.
It sounds like two-edged swords, though, because then even those people that take in entertainment or whatever you call that, this pablum, that when they take when people take that in, or like myself included, take in entertainment, we don't think of it as I don't think of it as destroying my being and eliminating the freedom that I have to become a existential being.
Well, yeah. So the way that I like, and Jordan gets after me this sometimes. Like I've taken on an attitude because I am so beholden to work, where I look at a lot of things as being sort of distractions from my self-disclosure. I start to look at entertainment, and maybe it's wrong. And a lot of the examples that I use, I poke fun of people who get obsessed over like that binge watch TV shows, and I know this is an unpopular opinion, and people are probably gonna hate me to say this, but like to me, like I don't know, like sitting and watching like 7 hours of like a TV show or something like that seems almost equivalent to doing heroin to me, and preventing the actualization of yourself in the existential condition. And my worry is that in a capitalistic society, we have so many of these passing amusements that distract us from becoming, that distract us from disclosing ourselves with the vitality that Simone and Kierkegaard and other people would have wanted to. It's like, I feel like in modernity, we just live in a massive amusement park, and I just want to get the hell out of it.
So it sounds like I wanted to emphasize maybe the idea of disclosing your being, because that could mean in a sense too that what if you're spending time watching a TV show that maybe discloses your being in a certain way, or reveals the ambiguous condition in some way. Maybe a drama like Breaking Bad or something makes you realize the extent a man could go in order to pay for medical bills, or whatever that story may be. Or you might watch Game of Thrones to realize how power is this, or you'll come to realize that power is this violent and unpredictable thing. I just don't. I'm just curious about that. What if these things that are considered pablum can be looked at another way, or that there are more to it than that? I mean, you watch Game of Thrones, so I don't. You probably have more.
Yeah,
as someone who is guilty of binge watching.
Do you feel judged over here?
No, I mean everyone has a different take on it, but I think that we live in like the golden age of television, so I think that
I'm missing out. Huh?
What I get hooked into the most is the storytelling, and I think that we tend to kind of how do I say this view television and other visual forms of media as inferior, but with really good screenwriting, it's literature.
It's becoming more like cinema too, right?
So, a lot of the stuff that I watch are based off of books. So I think that the beautiful thing about literature is the fact that it does, reveal to us in different ways the ambiguity of our condition.
And I'm sure they were thinking the same thing too, as if you think of episodic content in film, they were doing the same thing with books. Little novels would be premiered in magazines, and I'm sure there was some highfalutin philosopher saying, "Oh, you all just reading that Dickens? Oh my God!
Trash!
Pablum.
just like was it a waste of Sartre's intellect for him to write plays? So I guess the question, just to get into the specifics, because I'm like, I'm always buried in a book and I don't get outside my reality, and I'd like your perspective on this, Jordan. What am I missing out on with these pop shows like Game of Thrones and the things that, like, what do you think? How do you think they may be opening up people to possibilities that I'm unaware of? What am I missing out? Why have I written these off, and what am I missing out on?
Well, I would say, I mean, especially for Game of Thrones, because I only got into it until like very recently, because I just thought, oh well, it's just cheap and sci-fi. I got on my soapbox about it. But I think that there's something to be said when you actually watch the characters. You have like an emotional connection. And then I think like Circe is like a perfect example, because she is just this malicious person, but then at the same time, she's the most dedicated, diligent mother ever. So I think that when you see it almost on a micro scale, this like how complex a character can be, how they can sever someone's head and then, wipe off the blade and then go home and have dinner with their families.
Mm-hmm. I guess then Luke would argue then, like, why don't you just see a Shakespeare play? Why not?
Well, I guess what I'm trying to say is, the follow-up question is in beyond just sort of merely entertaining and creating sort of some momentary attachment to a character or something like that, how has it maybe qualitatively improved your life, and has it done so in a way that Simone would sort of approve of?
Well, a lot of times, and I don't know if this happens with you guys for like art and stuff like that, it kind of creates it enters through the back door, you know what I mean? Like you kind of don't expect something to resonate with you. Mm-hmm. And I think that's why some people really like drama and television, stuff like that, just because the way that events usually like play out. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, you know who you're a good ally with, and it's a very good ally, and I hope we become allies with him one day. Is another pop philosopher, is Slavoj Žižek, and Žižek is constantly giving talks on movies and cinema. Like he'll do stuff on like Superman and Buffy the Vampire Slayer.
Did he do one on Charlie Chaplin?
I'm sure he did. Yes, he did. I think I should have.
Yeah, because I think that the mind works in such complicated ways that I think a lot of times different mediums can kind of slip into your consciousness and you don't realize it.
Yeah.
And you're like, oh, wait a minute, what? Hold on.
Yeah, and I think it also goes into what we were doing in our podcast in our last lecture podcast series, like Roland Barthes' Camera Lucida, where the medium, or I guess the way he's seeing things is through semiology, which is the study of how we communicate through things, through whether it be gesture or film or traffic lights or television, or Game of Thrones or something like that. So I think maybe it is more so how you view the world rather than the thing in itself. Whether you can suck the marrow of the ambiguous condition out of something,
So could you make the case that like Game of Thrones is an existential show, and that it embodies some of these ideas, and that it actually helps people perhaps disclose in some better way?
Yeah, I think so.
Sure. And you could even maybe make the argument that Jersey Shore does the same thing, perhaps not.
Yeah, if you're looking for it, yeah.
Yeah, maybe not consciously, but maybe in a subconscious way.
It definitely nauseates me, right? And that nausea might be precipitative of some sort of life change, right? Because when I used to watch something like The Jersey Shore or something like that, I saw so many people sort of enslaved to just base instincts and animality that it precipitated me wanting to just do something better.
There's this author named David Shields, and he has this great little, it's just a chapter in this kind of nonfiction book he had, but he had this little rant where it was basically just him saying like, I hate George W. Bush because he's exactly like me. In the sense that like I relate to him, therefore it's like, he's just like me. And you're just like, like why? You know what I mean? Where it's just like, I'm the same way. He's kind of happy-go-lucky kind of guy, and I relate to that. But regardless of his political views, he's like I still relate to him in some way, and that's why I hate him. So maybe like these shows like Jersey Shore or whatever, we can get disgusted by it, but at the same time, maybe we are in our this might sound weird, but in our ivory tower, we are doing our own, what is it, gym, tan, and laundry. So maybe we are doing our own GTL sort of thing.
Yeah, I think so.
You know, I mean, and maybe watching Jersey Shore makes you realize that in some way, and you're kind of like, oh God, I'm the same way.
Yeah, that's what Kierkegaard did. You know, Kierkegaard used pseudonyms in this method of indirect communication, and what he would do is, under certain pseudonyms, he would sort of illustrate what we're talking about here with Jersey Shore would be, for Kierkegaard, known as the aesthetic life, meaning that it's sort of beholden to pleasure. And he would write entire books from that perspective to show us the emptiness and how we can sort of overcome them and transcend them to something higher. So I don't know, maybe Kierkegaard would have done, I don't know, maybe he would have used Jersey Shore in some way in his authorship.
Well, that's interesting because that's based, I mean, it almost sounds like, and I know it's still highly touted and discussed and debated, but that it does strike me as very conscious, as in Kierkegaard meant to do that, whether he meant to or meant not to, I don't know.
No, he meant to do it.
He meant to.
Yeah,
so, I mean, that was a very conscious act. While maybe these shows, maybe we're pulling out things that are maybe subconscious to it, and maybe that brings in a whole nother kind of thing, you know, like aesthetics and like, you know, psychoanalysis or something where it's just like, I'm not prepared to talk about that.
I wouldn't be surprised if something in Game of Thrones was intentionally placed there to make people think, and I would be surprised if something was placed in Jersey Shore to make us think deeper about life. Well, I think it's an interesting little discussion on TV. I want to make sure that we are respectful of our engineers' time, so we probably move on a little bit here to pages 83 through 88. So I guess, and it feeds into a lot of what we're talking about. You know, we talked about how if there is sort of a bifurcated society where everybody's not sort of existentially actualizing in the proper place, like, you know, what if it's not particularly destined for revolt, right? Like, if you have the sort of oligarchy or whoever's in control, they certainly don't want to change things up and make it sort of disruptive. And the individuals themselves might be very content with the way things are. They're like, I don't necessarily want to trade in the security of my job or reality TV or whatever else is part of my Philistine existence for something that might put more of a burden on me in the ethics of ambiguity. Is it a little bit morally narcissistic as existentialists to swoop down and be like, here, let me save you, let me give you the gospel, let me sort of let me liberate you in some way? Is it not sort of patronizing and condescending and perhaps not really treating people as people to do that? What do you think about that, Jordan?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of almost like, in a way, being like the metaphysical parent.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, exactly. So
like, they're there. No, let me help you pick from the menu.
Yeah, you can't eat chicken nuggets all your life. You're gonna have to sample something from the adult.
We're gonna have carrots with that.
But you can't have chocolate milk all your life, and that is the most reassuring thing in existence.
Exactly.
But to go along with that, it reminds me of Buddhism, at least in the sense that some that do achieve enlightenment, to use this analogy, they go across the river and they achieve enlightenment, and they're at enlightenment, but then they go back and they help bring people over, and I'm just curious how they do it in a way that's not necessary. It's not, when I read about that, it wasn't necessarily a patronizing thing. It was just like, okay, these people attained enlightenment and they had this generosity and this empathy with people to try to help them come over to the other side. Yeah, and I'm wondering what is the balance there.
Well, I think I'm just negatively rendering it. I think really there is sort of an overflowing of being that really, and Simone will say this in other parts, that the proper ethics of ambiguity doesn't really, on the surface, look really that different from like sort of the overflowing of love that Christians claim that they have in the relationship to God. So if you're properly relating yourself to the ethics of ambiguity, it should be sort of natural that you want to help other people out. Yeah. And I want to say this too, is that the alternative, right? The alternative to not helping other people liberate in an existential way, right? What's the alternative, Jordan?
I mean, it's kind of like one of those things where she kind of not pins us in a corner, but if we don't help other people out, then we run the risk of becoming tyrants.
Exactly. Like there's something tyrannical by not
Yeah, so
trying
maybe
to
that's
help
kind of
other
like
people
her emphasis on the process, right? If you kind of think of it in terms of kind of like crawling out of a ditch or something.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? It's like if you don't keep moving forward and keep that forward momentum, maybe it's you can backslide into,
dictatorship. Yeah.
Yeah,
Whoops,
but maybe you can maybe you come out from under the yoke of oppression, but then you slide back into that ditch and you're just on top of the heap as the oppressor.
You slip out on a banana peel and then you become a dictator and you're like,
how
did I get here?
Yeah, I think that's the thing. It's like what we do with Noetic. We've got to get a lot of people involved with it to really act as sort of a check and balance to make sure that we don't become too obsessed with ourselves, that we don't become, too egotistical, that we don't become some sort of tyrannical thing that we're doing here.
But I think that's a really good point, and when you're within trying to work out the ambiguous condition, just to have that in mind, just to know that you can't be tyrannical or anything like that. We need almost like I don't know which emperor it was for, but I remember how they would always, and you probably know this better than I do, Jordan, but they'd have some kind of person that whispered in their ear. I guess maybe when they were going on parade, I guess like after they came back from the battle, they just have like somebody whisper in the ear something like you're gonna die someday, you're gonna die someday, something like that, just to like
it was always for the triumph. So
yeah,
when you were hailed as an imperator, you would have this like absolutely like resplendent ceremony, and you were actually a god for a day. So you had like the face paint of Mars, and then you had basically you received all the regalia of a king, and someone rode with you in your chariot and said, remember, like, you're mortal, just so there's actually, it has a lot to do with envy, but there's even a fescinus, which was basically an amulet to like divert people's envy. So powerful was the position.
So maybe we need something like that. Maybe not so much in the sense saying like you're gonna die, because I think that's already kind of established in the ambiguous condition. But maybe something in the sense that like you are just as vulnerable. Like you're not better than everybody else. That you are still in this condition that everybody else is in. Like you're not.
Right, like maybe more or less fortunate to be
trying to
get not out of it, but just to try to like stare it down,
Mm-hmm.
So the other thing we need to keep in mind, right, is that if we are going to bring more people into the project of an ethics of ambiguity, that like our moral projects have to remain sort of flexible, right? Otherwise, and that's the really great thing about incorporating others' liberty into our own, right? Is that our values don't become sort of calcified and ossified. And I think she ties this in with a bit of her Marxist critique as well, right? So what was Jordan, do you recall what her problem was with the Marxist program in general? Like, I mean, she had like 5 problems with the Marxist program, but what was one of the biggest problems that she had with it? It tended to generalize.
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest one was the fact that with the collective element of Marxism is when you totally dial down the individual, then it's pretty much like a plurality of people just becomes like nothing. It just becomes like just a disposable
and
crowd.
maybe and to go along with that, maybe that like one proletariat is not the same
exactly
in each place. So yeah, like each individual, like you said, Jordan, just kind of adds up to a different number. If like maybe proletariat equals 239, and it's just like, well, this one equals like 235.7. Sorry, that's not gonna fit the agenda. Yeah, so I guess maybe she's arguing he's not, or I guess Marxism is not taking into account the diversity, like you said, that's needed.
Right, just like what we're doing here has to be integrated and prioritized with the other values in a democratic system or whatever. Marxism sort of universalizes what the proletariat is. And what Simone is saying, the error there is that the proletariat is going to be radically particularized to socioeconomic factors that are in their particular country, community, neighborhood, or whatever. So to embrace a Marxist program that defines what every proletariat should do and when to do it and how to do it is going to be problematic because people are too diverse to be systematized like that.
So to continue with that, how do you feel like you're doing that, Luke? Or how do you feel like you're doing that, Jordan? Or how do you feel like you're doing that, CJ? I was saying. No, but No. How do we feel like we're doing that now by having this discussion and being a part of this teaching platform? Because I mean, a lot of the times people think teaching, in a sense, or pedagogy can almost be, in some cases, not all, but some cases can be just one size fits all. You're all getting the same lecture and the same attention.
Well, in the short term, I would look at a short term and a long term perspective.
Okay.
On the short term, I hope someone is listening to this in their car right now and is realizing that their lives don't have to be filled with as much anguish as it has. Like, there are probably a lot of people who are listening to this right now who feel like they have failed to become something of dignity, right? Because they didn't go to school, or they didn't get the raise, or they don't act like the proper Christian, or they don't fit in, or something like that. They're not hitting what society says you have to be. Mm-hmm. And I think the great takeaway from what Simone and the Ethics of Ambiguity says is that all of that is societal sort of calcification, and we're going to sort of erupt and explode all that so we can sort of establish new conditional values for ourselves. So I guess on a micro level, I hope individuals choose things that define their lives, that make things life affirming. On a macro level, I hope this sort of aggregates up so that we have a real flourishing within the culture, and that we can use all this technology and science that claims to pursue for truth and efficiency, that we experience a new American cultural renaissance. That's what I would hope happens, that this sort of existential condition that Simone gave to me, and that maybe you all caught from me, just keeps multiplying. Just really keeps multiplying. And it's in our best interest for it too, right? Because it just keeps opening up new and greater possibilities for us. Like, who knows if someone's listening to this right now, 10 years from now, they may say screw it to all the Philistine stuff that they're wrapped up in. They may go and invent something that completely changes education that then we're then using to reach even more people. Yeah,
I mean, that's really fascinating, because sometimes it isn't, what you're describing is something that can't be put on a metric. You know what I mean?
And if it could,
it'd be one of maybe I'm seeing where she says like having those ideals are maybe like progress, where it's just like, okay, if we just do iPhone, if we just have 5G, we'll be perfect. Maybe something like that. Is that something similar to what you were going to say, Jordan, or did you have your own little?
Oh no, yeah, I definitely think that to your point about like the metrics, it takes like that human element out of it. So I don't know. I just think like with Noetic, I think that we're kind of imbuing the individual and discourse and just kind of infusing life back into the humanities, because I think that, with like core education and stuff like that, and like a lot of teachers, unfortunately, are really pressured to like teach to a certain standard for standardized testing.
Are we any better educated as a result of having these educational metrics?
But
are we a wiser society as a
exactly. So that
having
begs the question,
metrics?
What does that say for actual intellectual development and like critical thinking skills?
Right.
If I can, really like crush an SAT score or a GRE score, but if I have a hard time thinking for myself, then what does that really say for a value of an education?
Yeah, it seems like we live in a period where we have more knowledge than ever, but we have so little compassion, sympathy, wisdom, vitality. I see such sadness. Yet we have the internet and everything else that tells us anything that we possibly would have wanted.
I wonder if that's a very common outlook for all.
Kierkegaard definitely felt. Kierkegaard was living in a time of increased industrialization, and he was like
present age, right?
He's like, I can get on a train, I can visit here, I can do I can do all this incredible stuff. And he was writing in the 1840s and 50s. He's like, experiencing a level of mechanization and science that previously was unheard of. And he's like, yet I'm still miserable. And I think it would be even more amplified if he was alive today.
I mean, Schopenhauer, Heraclitus was known as the sad guy. Like the Greeks, like he was really sad. He was like,
You're just really grumpy.
Really grumpy.
Like we have it all. Like
Like
Hamlet, right? Hamlet had it all.
yeah.
Hamlet was the prince of Denmark and had
Hamlet's
a
a
beautiful
real-
girlfriend.
Tortured dude.
Yeah. And
Yeah, so it's like how do we combat? I guess maybe the question is already answered, but like how do we combat that pessimism? Then I guess maybe in reference to Simone, or I guess in reference to what we're doing.
We're doing it right now.
We're doing it.
I think the three of us, whether we recognize it or not, and I don't know, you guys are my therapy. The fact that you come in here and have this conversation with me means that I don't want to kill myself right now.
And maybe realizing that we can do that for others, and that we do that for others,
Right.
and that maybe sometimes just in the day to day, I mean, especially with friendships and like talking to friends, like sometimes it's not like and maybe this goes back to Simone. It's never just like level 3 of friendship, you know, like we had a great conversation, like and you have another conversation, gave them bought them dinner, level 7. Like it's not as clear
You
cut.
collected 600 coins.
Yeah, exactly. Go up a level. Yeah. So I mean.
All right.
I think maybe realizing that we are helping other people in that sense too, maybe combat that by being fully present and being fully empathetic.
And maybe they'll start their own.
them.
Maybe they'll start their own communities.
Yeah,
right?
we never know.
Initially, they may view us may view themselves as part of this community, but then maybe they'll take the model that we've developed here and implement it in their own community and put their own little spin on it. Maybe they want to do it about. Maybe they want to do what we've done for Noetic in regards to philosophy. Maybe they want to do that in regards to poetry, or more people, or like what you do with the gallery curations of music up at the Simple Gallery. Maybe people will sort of take that process and not perfection perspective to whatever their interest is, so they have these communities of flourishing.
This is completely analogous to music, as you know,
Yeah.
where some bands that are completely marginal, or at least in their senses failed, have influenced, or that their main, not to say their main glory, but it's just like the fact that they served as a node for so many other artists
You and I were talking about
musicians.
You and I were talking about how the Velvet Underground was a perfect example of this. I was talking to CJ last night about.
It's pretty cool.
So what's interesting, we actually have a few sort of rivulets back to the Velvet Underground. There's this old saying that the Velvet Underground were never particularly successful in their day financially, but anyone who ever bought one of their records started a band or did something, and you can see how many other people they launched. I mean, in the most immediate sense, Nico, Andy Warhol got involved with them. But even further down the line, Jonathan Richman, I mean, and then there's a certain aesthetic of everybody sort of imitating that.
But I think that goes on to like what we're talking about, where it's like, oh, X person, they didn't sell 10,000 records, or they didn't get $1 million, but look at the 10,000 people that they were able to impact and change their life in a positive way, or even like the 5 people that they were able to help make their lives better.
Our lives are better for having the Velvet Underground. And
right.
Our lives are better for having Simone de Beauvoir.
Yeah, and my life is better for having you all in my life, and you know, I hope I can at least be a positive note as well, or at least maybe that's the goal. Yeah,
because my life is certainly rich, like having you guys in it. So without getting too touchy feeling, looks like ugh feelings.
Put on the glasses.
You guys know how emotionally unavailable I am. Okay. So I wanted to return to the problem that CJ so eloquently stated earlier, and maybe I'll just let you do it again. I mean, it had.
What did I ask?
Well, it was this issue, whether or not Simone has contradicted herself. Because on the one hand, what is she against?
Sure, she's against goals, but she's giving a goal.
And the goal that she's giving us, right, is what?
Full disclosure.
That we ought to build
and freedom through action.
Yeah, that we ought to build communities of that.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a philosophical contradiction on here? Can she at the same time maintain that there are no unconditional values, but at the same time say we ought to cultivate communities of and individuals who possess conditional value?
It's hard for me to reconcile, because she's saying, well, there are no imperatives, except for this one.
I think we have to look at the nature of a moral imperative, and what this ought that Simone is giving us is not a logical ought, right? In the logic, it's not logically necessary. Like, well, if 1 is 1 equals 2, or 1 plus 1 equals 2, you know, it's not that type of ought.
She talks about the appeal, so I think that kind of goes back to like what we've been talking about of sort of separating yourself from factity and having that like emotional reasoning.
I'm okay with it. Because the type of ought that it is, it's more like, well, if you want a better life, you ought to do that. I mean, it may not be philosophically necessary, but I mean, it speaks to the reality of our existence. I mean, it's not demonstrable, it's not provable, it's just like really good advice. Like if Jordan,
that really does get at the heart of what she says about using appeal to get other people on board. Like you can't, I mean, you didn't like march up to CJ and be like, join this project right now.
It is the ethically right thing to do.
Yeah, like you didn't like. I mean,
okay.
I mean, at least it didn't happen in my case. I don't know about you, CJ.
No.
That's another story.
Yeah, that's another story for another day.
CJ asked me to hang out.
That's another story.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, it's like that idea of appeal, though, right? And like you build consensus, and that's a much more emotive process, which has, you know, logic and reason bound up in it. And it's not necessarily like, it's not an equation for a good life, but it's a pretty good place to start.
Yeah, it's CJ, I mean, many of you know CJ is an incredible musician. And like I asked CJ for advice about how I can become a better musician. And sometimes he'll be like, well, you ought to try to do things that make you uncomfortable, or do things that you haven't done or whatever. And it's like, it's not like objectively right or wrong. It's just his experience of what has worked for him as a musician. I think Simone's just telling us what has worked for her as a being that is staring down the ambiguous condition, and it seems to be internally justified. Yeah. I think it's kind of analogous to that.
I like the analogy to advice a lot, because if you think of, you know, going up to a good friend and asking them for advice, it's almost kind of presupposed that they know what has happened in your life.
Yeah.
You've kind of given them the rundown, or they know the rundown fairly well, and that you know that they won't try to sugarcoat it or try to fluff it up. They're just going to just give it to you like, yes, this is what I would do for you. I can't remember what the book was, but it was some motivational book. I can't remember, but it said, like, if you're having trouble making a decision, try to view it in the way that you would, like, if you're having this problem, like, rephrase or ask yourself for advice like you would for a friend. Like, how would you give a friend advice if they were going through the same thing that you did? And you realize they're like, oh, if I do that, and I'm just like, let me be real with you for a second, blah, 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 blah. And then you're like, wait, yeah, exactly. You'll find that little thing in the back of your head, that little doubt, or, you know, just kind of like that self-talk, having that distance from yourself and being able to do that will in some way help you, you know, kind of see the problem in a different way. And maybe that's cool with philosophy, or at least like Simone's case. And maybe, I mean, I totally get the argument, but maybe that's what's so cool about philosophy, is that you have that kind of person that's a little separated from you, but they are you in some sense that they're not at the same time, and they're just like, giving you advice, man. This is just kind of tough advice, but it's something that maybe you would have told yourself, but you just didn't have the guts to, or you just didn't really think about. Yeah, you want to admit it
to yourself. And I think it makes it, if we think of it or frame it in terms of advice, it makes it much more palatable. Like, I don't want philosophers, like, giving me an outline, be like, all right, here are the 10 steps that you need to do to be happy or to run your life. Like,
yeah, and that's why some philosophers have so much appeal. I can think of the Frenchman Michel de Montaigne. I mean, or Montaigne, or however you pronounce that French word. I mean, to me at least, and for me and many others, I mean, he's really respected and enjoyed because he just talks or he writes how he talks, or I assume how he would talk. You know, he's just very open about his own faults, and, you know, he's just like, yeah, I'm not the best guy, but, you know, this is what I'm going through right now, and this is who I am, and this is what I've observed, you know, in a very open way that, like a friend, like we're saying, like a friend would give you advice. So, I mean, I think that is pretty key. I think, or it is very fascinating. I never really thought of this until we just got gabbing about it, but it's really cool. Advice, philosophy as advice from a friend.
Yeah.
So I think we're all right. So we've got a little bit of a dilemma here as far as time
existential dilemma. Oh no! What do you mean time? You can't.
Yeah.
Save existence.
Well, I think so. I think to be mindful of our engineer's time, and also what I think is probably a good break. I like where the trajectory of this conversation. I had anticipated covering up to 105. I think we've gotten to page 94 in my mind. So that might mean that we have to cover more next week, or we might have to do at least 2 more podcasts on Simone, given all the factors going on here. Maybe we should just close it out with one question and then call it a day.
Sure.
Jordan, is that okay? I know you prepped to 105, but I think I think if I launched into the other stuff, I wouldn't do it justice, and I wouldn't be respectful of people's time. So the only thing I want to ask about this consideration of other people's disclosure and incorporating it into our own set of values and whatnot is, ought this to be, so we're okay with it, the ought being with our contemporaries. But what if we expand it out into the future? Like individuals who will exist 1,000 years from now. Maybe someone's listening to this 1,000 years from now. It's totally possible. Right? How much, if we're supposed to integrate the values of those who are contemporary with us and liberate them towards freedom, how much are we to take into consideration the next generation?
So like Leviticus in the Bible, where it says it gives you all like certain books in the Bible give you these certain codes of ethics, or these ways of being that were contemporaneous to the people at that time, like a Leviticus or some kind of book that was very much like, okay, you gotta plant the crops.
Yeah.
And on the 7th year, you're not gonna plant anything. Something that was for people, and then just to expand that.
Yeah, I think the thing that's kind of problematic, right, is that how much we're should take into consideration potential beings, future people that don't exist yet, into our ethical projects. And if we're not, or if we ought to only really be considered with who's alive today, it's not so much a problem. But if we have to consider one generation, then why not 2 generations? Why not 3 generations? And then if we do, how do we do that existential calculus into how we prioritize our values and what's worthwhile? Or is it just too incomprehensible, and we just sort of do the best with what we can right here?
And does it sound like a bit of a bind?
No, I mean, can I read this one quotation?
Sure, please. Yeah.
To abandon the past to the night of factity is a way of depopulating the world. I would distrust a humanism which was too indifferent to the efforts of men of former times. If the disclosure of being achieved by our ancestors does not all move us, why be so interested in that which is taking place today? Why wish so ardently for future realization? So, I mean, I think that if we think of it and just act in our present, mindset and disclose things in our own context, then future generations, depending on their own context, will look back and say, they disclose their being in such a manner, so we should disclose our own.
So we're setting an example for future generations.
Exactly. Yeah.
I mean, we're reading Simone, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So, I just didn't know,
drops mic, walks out,
yeah.
And we're done.
Excellent. Well, yeah, no, I think that's probably the right answer, to be honest. But for some reason, when I was putting together the lecture series, it seemed to be a bigger problem than it actually was. But I think that's a great one. I'm glad that you brought that passage out. I didn't dwell as much in my lecture series on how she tries to recover virtue from the past. Mm-hmm. I think there's this guy, Travis Ross, who did a really excellent 2-part lecture series on Simone de Beauvoir's The Ethics of Ambiguity, and I think he covers the conservative dimension in Simone better than I did in my own lecture series. And I highly recommend people checking out Travis's lectures, because I do think they complement what we're doing quite well. He's a philosophy professor down in Texas. So I think that's a good stopping point, and we'll just pick it up next time. Did anybody else have anything else they wanted to say?
No. I mean, I think if anything, this like the passage that I just read shows why studying history is super important and why it's not particularly wise just to completely whitewash the past and all that stuff.
Totally.
But that's as a former history major speaking. But that's getting off my soapbox. I'm done.
All right, guys. Go download the Noetic app, make a donation if you like this, and we'll see you next week. See you.
Bye, everyone.